guys, and welcome back to another video on my channel. I have to apologize at the beginning of this video, just like so many other videos that I've been making lately, because there were no videos last week. It was my birthday on Thursday, and the week just consisted of a lot of drinking, and that was about it. I didn't plan to not upload videos, but it just kind of happened. But I'm back, and hopefully this time I can stick to my regular schedule, at least for a little while. I mean, I know there'll always be slip-ups here and there, but lately it's just been a lot, so hopefully this time I can actually stick to it. Anyways, today's video is going to be a very interesting one, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you guys, so let's get right into it. Today we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Dorothy Arnold. Dorothy was born on July 1st, 1885, and was an heiress and socialite in New York City. She was born to a very, very wealthy family. Her father was named Francis Arnold, and her mother was Mary Arnold, and her father was a he worked in the makeup kind of industry. I believe he worked mainly with perfumes, but he was extremely wealthy. Dorothy had just recently graduated from college, and she was living back home in her family house with her parents and I believe at least one of her siblings. I think she had a brother and a sister, and they had lived in Manhattan, New York for her entire life. So she was back there now, just while she worked on building her career as a writer. Dorothy was said to be a very bright and happy woman. She really fit in this kind of like high society lifestyle. And I know that seems weird to say because obviously growing up in a very wealthy family who does live kind of lavish, you would think that the children would grow up to kind of be like that and really fit in. But you do hear about stories often where the kids kind of try and break away from the parents and they want to kind of make a name for themselves and not really be a part of that kind of lifestyle. But Dorothy really enjoyed being part of this high society group. She really enjoyed living lavish and wealthy and really liked her standard in society, and she fit in perfectly with all of those high standard, high society, very, very wealthy people. It was now December 12th, 1910, and Dorothy was 25 years old. She had a party coming up that she needed to buy a dress for, and so she woke up on that day and told her mother that she had planned on going into the city to do some dress shopping. Her mother ended up actually offering to come along with Dorothy. However, her mom had been on the kind of like verge of having a cold at that time, and so because of that, Dorothy just said to her, you know what, it's better if you stay home. I'll go dress shopping, and if I find anything that I like, I'll call you from the store and you can come down and see it and just kind of approve of the dress. That way her mother wouldn't be out in the cold, risking getting her illness worse or anything like that. She was just in the comfort of her home, and she wouldn't be walking around New York City in December, which is very cold. So she left her house at around 11 a.m. and when she left, she had about $25 to $30 on her, and that would be around $600 to $800 today. And that is just absolutely crazy to think about, somebody carrying that much cash on them at any time. However, this was a very long time ago, and obviously they didn't have credit cards and things like that, so I guess you really didn't have a choice. However, I personally think that it is a little bit dangerous to carry that much money on you at any time. Dorothy had been walking down 5th Avenue where she stopped on 59th Street and went into a grocery store where her family was very well known. I believe they had an account there that they could kind of charge to, and while in this grocery store, Dorothy bought a large amount of chocolate and just charged it to her family's account. Now, the people who worked in this store were very familiar with the Arnold family and Dorothy, and they said that while she was in the store at this time, nothing stood out to them. She seemed just her normal happy self, and she bought the chocolate and left, which was nothing unusual for Dorothy. She did this quite often. After leaving the grocery store, she then headed to a bookstore located on 27th Street, and while she was in this store, she purchased a book called Engaged Girls Sketches, which was kind of like a lot of short stories in one book, and they were all romantic comedy type stories. Again, Dorothy was a regular in this store. The people who were in the store knew her, and they said that nothing really stood out. She was just acting like her normal, happy, kind self while she was shopping in this bookstore. It was now around 2 p.m. when Dorothy had left the bookstore, and while walking down the street, that is when she ran into a girl by the name of Gladys King. The girls had actually gone to college together, and they were very familiar with one another, and they had always hung out in the same group, so they just kind of stopped and started chatting, and that is when they realized that they were shopping for the same party. So Dorothy was buying a dress for this party, and so was Gladys. Now, they chatted for a little while, but then Gladys had to dismiss herself because she was running late to meeting her mom for lunch. So the two girls went their separate way, and this would be the last time that anybody would ever see Dorothy. Gladys turned around to see Dorothy walking through Central Park, which was the way that Dorothy usually took to get home, but Dorothy had never made it home that night. Once it had become quite late and Dorothy had not returned home from her shopping trip, her family started to become a little bit alarmed, and that is when her parents took it upon themselves to start calling friends and family to ask if anybody had seen or heard from Dorothy, but nobody knew where she was, and nobody had any information as to why she was not home. Something that you're going to notice reoccurringly in this case, in my opinion, is that the parents of Dorothy, being Frances and Mary, act very, very strange throughout the entirety of this case. And that started on the night that Dorothy didn't return home. Elsie was a good friend of Dorothy's, but Frances and Mary had not phoned her to ask if she had seen Dorothy, but somehow Elsie had still gotten wind of the fact that Dorothy was missing. And being Dorothy's good friend, she decided to call the household just to make sure that her friend had in fact made it home. When she called the household, Mary had answered, and that again is Dorothy's mother. And when she answered, Elsie said to her, "Has Dorothy made it home yet?" And she was told by Mary that yes, Dorothy had made it home. Elsie thought that this was kind of strange, so she just said, "Is it okay if I talk to her? I just want to know and make sure that she's alright." And that is when Mary told her that Dorothy couldn't come to the phone right now because she had a very bad headache and decided to go to bed. So that is very strange because as far as we are all concerned, Dorothy never made it home that evening, so why lie? Another thing that was very strange about this entire case is that Dorothy's parents did not officially report her missing for 6 weeks after she hadn't made it home. Now, I do understand that Dorothy was a full-grown woman. She was 25 years old, and this was a different time. They didn't have cell phones where you could just text her and be like, "Where are you? When are you coming home?" Or she couldn't just text them quickly and be like, "Hey, I'm going to my friend's house for the night," or anything like that. So I do understand wanting to maybe give her a day or two, but 6 weeks to me seems excessive. 6 weeks is a very, very long time to have no idea where your daughter is, when she simply left the house to go shopping and had never said anything about plans to be away for an extended period of time. That, however, is not saying that the family didn't do anything those 6 weeks that Dorothy was missing, because they did. The day after Dorothy had never made it home, the family had decided to call their good friend John Keith, who was a lawyer. They brought him into the home and they asked him to just kind of look through Dorothy's stuff to see if he could see anything that stood out to him as to where she may be. Now, he did this, but obviously being a lawyer, he's not really in law enforcement, and he doesn't really deal with missing persons cases or things like that. So he then recommended to the family that they hire a private investigator. And the family again was extremely wealthy, and so they took the next step and hired, I think, like 3 or 4 private investigators to work on Dorothy's case. While searching Dorothy's room, it was said that they didn't really find anything too out of the ordinary in her room. Obviously, the clothes that she was wearing and her bag and whatnot were missing, but that seemed to be about it. There was burnt remains in the fireplace in the bedroom of papers, but it is strongly believed that those were just rejection letters that Dorothy had gotten while writing into a paper hoping to be published. The only thing that really stood out that was found in Dorothy's room was pamphlets for cruise ships. Now, we're going to come back to talk about that in just a moment. But I just want to mention it here because that's kind of the timeline of things. So these PIs searched Dorothy's room, they searched the house, they were watching in Europe, which we will also come to talk about in just a moment, but that is important. And they checked, morgues, hospitals, everything like that where you would think that somebody could be who was missing, but all of these turned up completely empty-handed. Francis and Mary finally decided to go to the police on January 25th after being advised to do so by the private investigators. The same day that they had gone to the police to share the information about their missing daughter is the same day that this case kind of went public. That exact same day when the case went public is when the family put up a $1,000 reward, which in today's money would be about $26,000. But despite putting up this very large amount of money as a reward for any information on Dorothy's whereabouts, nothing really came from this, and that many leads didn't come flowing in right away. It took a little bit for anybody to start calling into the police department. Now, something else that is very strange about this case that you might not be considering if you've never been to New York is that the area in which Dorothy had vanished from is said to be one of the busiest kind of areas in the entire world. Not only back then, but still to this day. It is in the middle of New York City. You know, Fifth Avenue is extremely popular, Central Park is extremely popular, and at that time it was very, very populated. There should have been millions of people there, but despite that, nobody saw anything, and if they did, they were keeping it to themselves. After coming out publicly about their daughter's disappearance, that is when the police advised Francis to hold a press conference, and he did so. And in this press conference is when he mentioned that there was a $1,000 reward for any information on Dorothy, but he then went on to say that he believed that his daughter was dead. He said that there had been a sighting of her in Central Park, and that somehow she'd fallen or she'd been attacked, and then somebody threw her body into the lake. Now, I don't know if this is just me overthinking things, but I feel like that is a very bold statement for somebody to make. You don't really know where your daughter is. Where did this information come from, and why are you assuming the worst? I feel like everybody deals with things differently, so I should not jump down this man's throat. I don't know what he was going through. I'm sure everybody reacts differently when something as traumatic as your daughter going missing does occur. However, jumping to the conclusion that she is deceased just seems out of the ordinary to me, even while studying these cases a lot, because usually parents really like to hold on to the hope factor of things, even if there is solid evidence that their child is no longer with us. However, there was no solid evidence like that in this case, but Francis still chose to make a public statement that he believed that his daughter was deceased. I feel like within this case it will be very easy for me to get ahead of myself, and I don't want to do that, so we're going to go ahead right now and just kind of get into the theories. Now, this case is very old and it is very popular, and so because of that, there are a lot of theories within this case, and obviously this video can only be so long, so I won't be diving into every single one of the theories, but I will be talking about the theories that I think are most likely. However, if you have a theory that you strongly believe or you strongly think is possible and I don't mention it in today's video, please feel free to leave it in the comments down below, and I will pin your comment so that we can all kind of be on the same page. The biggest theory in this case that I feel like even today is most likely widely believed is that Dorothy had ran away. Now, Dorothy's life on the outside looked phenomenal. She was very, very wealthy. She was the daughter of a very wealthy man, and he seemed to really take care of her. And from the outside, it looked like she was living the dream. However, Dorothy was going through a very difficult time at the time that she had vanished. Dorothy, again, was a very passionate writer, and writing was completely her entire life, and that is what she had wanted for a career since she was a young girl. However, her writing career was not going as well as she had planned. She'd written into a few companies trying to get published as of lately, but every single one of these companies had turned her down. After sharing this information with her family, they started to be extremely critical of Dorothy, most of this criticism coming from her father, and her father started saying to her, you know, your writing will never be good enough, it's not getting any better, you're not doing good, and you should probably just pick a different career path. And obviously, with writing being her passion, that would be enough, especially coming from a very close family member, to tear absolutely anybody down. On top of the writing thing, Dorothy had recently started seeing a man in secret, and the reason she was seeing this man in secret is because her father made it very apparent that he did not approve of Dorothy's relationship with this man. Now, that would be just kind of adding to the reason as to why Dorothy may have ran away. However, there is a lot of theories within this theory. Many people believe that she had run away with a specific man to Europe, where others believe she could have run away with any man. Maybe she had several lovers that people weren't aware of, or this lover that she was secretly seeing that people are aware of was just kind of like a cover-up, or maybe she ran away there completely alone. The only reason people really held this entire thing to her being in Europe was again because they had found pamphlets for cruise lines in her bedroom that were of cruises leaving from New York City and heading towards Europe. All of these cruise lines were contacted, but none of them had any records of a Dorothy Arnold boarding any of their ships, and they didn't remember seeing a girl who fit Dorothy's description. Now, another thing to kind of add to this theory, and not necessarily meaning that she ran away to Europe, but maybe she just ran away altogether, is that during this time when this was all getting really publicized and Francis was making a lot of TV appearances, appearing to be very sad, he had received a letter from Dorothy that was sent from within New York City, and it had said on it, "I am safe," and it was signed Dorothy Arnold. However, during this entire time, Francis completely stood by the fact that he strongly believed that his daughter was deceased, and he didn't think that this letter had come from her, and he believed that somebody was playing a prank on him. Now, obviously, this was a very long time ago, and they couldn't confirm whether or not this was Dorothy's handwriting. However, in all of the things that I could find, it does appear that the handwriting looked very similar to that of Dorothy's, but Francis just thought that whoever had written it had really practiced to make their writing look exactly like Dorothy's handwriting. So now let's talk about this secret lover that Dorothy had been seeing. This secret lover, or love interest of Dorothy's, was a man by the name of George. George had come from a very wealthy family, which you would think would be good. However, he was in his 40s and he worked as an engineer, but he still lived at home and heavily relied on his parents for pretty much absolutely everything, which is why Francis and Mary did not approve of him. Now, during this time that Dorothy had been seeing him, the family didn't really tell her not to see him yet. However, at one point he had somehow convinced Dorothy to take her family's personal belongings without their permission and sell them for a profit so that the two of them could go on a trip to Boston. And they did. They went on this trip to Boston without Francis or Mary's knowledge, but when they came back and the family that had realized that a bunch of their personal belongings had been sold and Dorothy came clean about the entire thing, her family told her that she was not to see George anymore. However, Dorothy would go against her parents' wishes just one more time, meeting up with George before him and his family left for Europe. And that is kind of where the belief that Dorothy could have possibly left with George to Europe and he could have been hiding her there. Now, Francis, like I already mentioned, strongly believed that his daughter was deceased. He didn't think she was in Europe, he just thought that she was gone. And so he didn't really think that there was too much to this theory. However, his wife did not share the same beliefs as him, and she thought the possibility that Dorothy was in Europe with George was very, very strong. Strong enough that her and her son actually packed up and headed to Europe to try and track down George. They were successful in doing so. They tracked him down to a hotel in Italy, and they showed up at his room. They knocked on the door. He let them in. They sat down and had a conversation. And this is when George had told them that he didn't even know that Dorothy was missing until they had showed up to his hotel room. Not really getting the answers that they wanted, being upset but still just having no answers, Dorothy's mother and her brother just headed back to New York. After hearing about Dorothy's disappearance, that is when George also returned back to America. And he did a lot of work in Dorothy's case on his very own. He hired private investigators to look for Dorothy. He spent thousands of dollars on these private investigators, and he had even held a press conference of his own where he basically was just saying how much he loved Dorothy and how he really wanted her to return home. And in this press conference, he had said that if Dorothy did return home, he would then marry her, which obviously did not make Mary or Frances very happy because, again, they did not approve of George whatsoever. Following the next 5 years, several people came forward saying that they had seen Dorothy or even claiming that they were Dorothy, but nothing had ever come from any of this. Something that just kind of stood out to me is that if Dorothy ran away on her own, being a woman who grew up always in a very high-class, lavish kind of lifestyle, you would think that she would have taken more with her. She did have money on her at the time, as none of the stores in the area said that she had purchased a dress from them. However, she didn't really have anything else. She had none of her personal belongings or anything like that, which obviously isn't too out of the ordinary for somebody running away, but it does kind of spark your interest a little because she was used to living such a lavish lifestyle. Would she have not thought to have taken at least a few things with her, even some things she could sell for more money later on when she could have possibly needed? Another theory that I mentioned briefly but I haven't dove into yet is the belief that maybe Dorothy was kidnapped and possibly murdered. Again, this is the theory that Dorothy's father strongly believed. However, there was no evidence to suggest that this is what happened, but there was also no evidence to suggest that anything else had happened either. I feel so bad saying this in a case like this because I hate to be the person who judges the family who is obviously going through a lot at this time, but I just think that they seem a little bit sketchy to me. To just assume that your daughter is dead so quickly after she's disappeared, and they were actually trying to get a death certificate for Dorothy so that they could write her out of their will. They just really strongly were saying that they believed that she was deceased. Not only that, but not reporting her missing for 6 weeks and telling that one friend that she had made it home when clearly she had not. The entire thing just seems very, very strange to me, but again, I hate to put the blame on the family, especially when you don't know what they were going through at that time. Anyways, again, Francis said that he believed that his daughter had been hit over the head and thrown into the lake, and so because of this, police took this very seriously and they tried to search the lake. However, again, Dorothy had vanished in December and she was not reported missing until January. Now, this is New York City, and the area in the lake that Francis had assumed that she had been thrown into was completely frozen over at the time, making it pretty much impossible that his daughter could be in there. However, once the lake had thawed out, they did a massive search of this lake, but nothing was ever found, not anything belonging to Dorothy, not Dorothy herself, just absolutely nothing to do with this case. But just like many of the other theories in this case, this theory has theories within it. So there is another kind of murder theory that I want to talk about today, and that revolves around the man by the name of Edward Glanaris. Edward Glanaris was put into the Rhode Island State Prison in 1916 for extortion. During the time that Edward was in prison, he had allegedly had a spiritual awakening and he became super religious, and because of this, he wanted to confess all of his sins so that he could go to heaven. During this time is when he confessed to believing that he could have possibly been involved in burying the body of Dorothy Arnold, and he had allegedly been asked to do so by a man in a bar named Benoit. He was paid about $250 for doing so, and he said that the way that this all kind of happened was he was sitting in this bar. I'm not sure if he had previous encounters or relations to this Benoit person, but allegedly this Benoit person asked if he could assist in moving a very sick, unconscious woman from a house in New Rochelle to a new house up the Hudson River near West Point. Now, he agreed to do so, and then they did this, and the following day he got a phone call saying that the woman had passed away. So he returned back to the home, which was up the Hudson River, where he buried this woman underneath the concrete floor in the basement of this home. He claimed that after finishing burying the body of this woman underneath the floor in that basement, he was paid again $250 by a man who he did not know, but claimed to have looked extremely wealthy. Because of this statement, it was highly theorized that maybe the man who had paid him to dispose of Dorothy's body could have been George or even Francis. However, there is no real motive as to why either of these men would want Dorothy dead, and the house in which he had claimed that the body was buried under has been extensively searched by authorities. They ripped up the floor, they did a full search, and nothing was ever found there. During the entire investigation revolving around Dorothy Arnold's disappearance, police strongly believed that Dorothy was out there somewhere and that she was safe and possibly just needed space or had run away with a lover, and they all thought that she would return. There were posters put up everywhere offering money for information on Dorothy. Several people came forward claiming to have seen Dorothy, and during this time this case was extremely publicized, and because of that the family had received 2 ransom notes saying that they had Dorothy, and if they wanted to see her again they would pay them this money for her safe return. However, both of these ransom notes were found to be a hoax. This next theory that I just want to mention, in my opinion, is a little bit out there, but at the time that Dorothy had disappeared, abortions were both very illegal and extremely dangerous because obviously they did not have the proper equipment to do so. Shortly after Dorothy had vanished, there was a home in the area that had been raided by police, and once this home was raided, 2 doctors and a nurse had been arrested for performing illegal abortions within the home. That is when one of the doctors had claimed that the other doctor had said that Dorothy Arnold was his patient and that she had passed away during the abortion, and he didn't know what to do with her, so he had cremated her body. Now, for that time, it wasn't that rare that an abortion could have resulted in death. Again, they didn't have the proper equipment to perform abortions, and they were extremely illegal, so oftentimes they would use very dangerous methods that would often end with the woman passing away. However, the likelihood of Dorothy being pregnant just doesn't seem that high. Everybody who knew her said that there was no visible signs that she was pregnant, and it just didn't seem like something that was too plausible. However, of course, if Dorothy planned on getting an abortion, it was very likely that if this was the case, she would have kept it a secret, obviously making this theory possible. But it is strongly believed that the doctor who had blamed the other doctor for this abortion was just trying to cut himself a deal in hopes that he would get a lesser sentence. The last theory in this case that some people believe is that due to the struggles that Dorothy was facing in her life at this time, maybe she had decided to commit suicide. Now, of course, that is also likely possible, just like every other theory in this case. However, I just don't really see it being the case. A lot of these cases, they just throw suicide in there, I find, just to kind of explain it away. However, I don't think that if somebody committed suicide, it would be that difficult to find the body. I know that may sound a little insensitive, but I just feel like it has been so many years, and if that was the case, her body would have shown up at some point, and it still hasn't to this day, which to me seems that maybe she had run away and started a new life under a new name, or somebody had been a part of her murder and then covered it up very, very well. But that's kind of all the theories that I really believe are even possible in this case. Again, there are many other theories that are talked about online about this case, and if you have one that you strongly believe or think is possible, you can please leave it in the comments so that we can all be on the same page. But that is kind of all that I really wanted to mention about this case today. My heart sincerely goes out to the loved ones and the family of Dorothy Arnold. It is absolutely devastating to lose somebody in such a manner where you don't know what happened to them, you don't know if they're out there, and that is just such a confusing thing for somebody to go through. I can only imagine what her family was going through at that time. But guys, that brings us to the end of this video. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.